week. So just a quick little bit about both the work that we do in the Community Service Learning Center, which is the center that puts this series on, and also just a quick little bit about Democracy 101, what it is and why we do it. So the Community Service Learning Center, how many of you have ever heard of it before or familiar? Okay. Well, I'm here to tell you it's a fantastic resource on campus. Our center is located in the Office of Student Life. How many of you know where the Office of Student Life is? Okay, I'm going to ask another question. How many people know where Panda Express is? Okay, I think everyone probably knows where Panda Express is. So the Office of Student Life and the Community Service Learning Center are just right across the hallway from Panda Express. Our mission in the Community Service Learning Center is to empower students, all of you, to be active and engaged citizens. So that looks like a lot of different things. That can look like getting involved in volunteer service in the community. It can look like getting to know the issues that are going on in our local, state, and national areas. It can mean organizing yourselves in a student organization or around a particular issue. There are lots of ways to become civically engaged, and we're really excited to think with all of you and to help you and support you as you figure out what you want to do about the issues that you care about in the world. So Democracy 101 is just one of our programs. It started actually in response to a series of town hall meetings that were held after the 2016 presidential election. So we partnered with Student Senate and the Division of Inclusion and Equity to host this series of town hall meetings. And students had lots of questions. They had questions about the Electoral College. They had questions about, you know, what are the kind of the pillars of a democratic system? Do protests matter? Lots of these big questions about what democracy means, what it looks like, and how to do it. So that's where Democracy 101 was born. And we really have a lot of fun putting the series together. Jane Johnston, who I'll introduce you to right now. Hi, Jane. Works in our office along with Stephanie Torres in the back, who's eating pizza. Hi, Stephanie. And these students, along with others, really are the kind of the blood, sweat, and tears of Democracy 101 and all of our other programs as well. They make it happen. So I want to just say thanks for being here. Please make sure before you leave to grab some of our materials on the table. We have lots and lots of great opportunities for you to learn more about the communities that we live in, to elevate your voice, to get out, get registered, get mobilized as voters. And tonight is just a really great topic and a really relevant topic as we think about what it means to get to become educated and to educate yourself on the issues and the necessity of being able to trust news sources and to navigate the news. So I think we're all really excited to hear from Jesse Holcomb tonight. So thanks again for coming, and I'm going to turn it over to Jane.
Hi everyone. As Melissa said, my name is Jane Johnston. I work in the CSLC as a Civic Engagement Associate, really helping put on all of our democratic engagement events like this. So as Melissa said, this is only one of our programs. We also do voter registration drives. We have a podcast through our office. We have a really special event coming up on November 20th called Elect Her. And any women who are interested in either running for political office or just building leadership skills in general are welcome to attend that. We have information on that on the table outside of here. So any questions you guys might have about programming or ways to get involved in our office, we're more than happy to help you out. Before we get started, I know a lot of you are here for Lib 100 or 201, so we have our awesome peer mentors right over here, and they are happy to help you guys unpack anything that we learn here tonight and help you guys with your assignments. So before I introduce our wonderful presenter tonight, I want to take a minute. So you guys see these big pieces of paper on your tables. So what I need you guys to do is take the marker that's on the table and split that paper up into 4 boxes. And then we're going to take probably about 3 or 4 minutes with your table to, in the first box, write down what you know about local media and its relationship to democracy, and then media at large, I guess. And then in the second box, write down any questions that you have going into our presentation. And keep those questions in mind, and we'll have some time for a little Q&A at the end. So take about 3 or 4 minutes to talk with your table, and we'll come back as a group after that. Thanks. We're probably going to take about 1 or 2 more minutes, so wrap things up with your group in the next couple minutes. Okay, we're going to come back together here. I really just want to go around quickly, and maybe each table can just say one thing that they already know about local news, democracy, media, that kind of stuff. So we'll start over here. What did you guys say? Yeah, so local media outlets like Wood TV, and then I see you have like CNN and Fox, NPR. Yeah, those are great. What about right back here? News channels tend to have bias. That's a good one. What about you guys? Yeah, their own narratives. Yeah, kind of the same thing, but I like that, yeah. What about you guys? Yeah, local media tells you about local events that are going on. What about you guys? Yeah, so biases either for or against something you said, your local paper, yeah, had a bias, a really bad bias against your school. Okay. What about you guys? Okay. Yeah, so just reading the headlines and moving on, not really paying attention to the details. Someone from this table want to say what you guys? Yeah, local events, yep. And back here. Yeah, swaying communities' votes one way or another. What about over here? What did you guys write down? Yeah, so even like our own outlets here at Grand Valley have information about local events. Yeah.
So we said to inform that they're biased, and for local news, they do traffic, local issues, and especially school closings. Those are great.
Yes, very, very important. What about over here, last group?
So for local, we said it allows for more of a targeted audience.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, more targeted audience. That's great. Okay, yeah, so we know a little bit about local media, but I would assume that there's still a ton of questions that you guys have. So for the questions that you guys wrote down, I just asked you to keep those in mind through our presentation, see if you get some answers, and if not, we'll have time at the end for Q&A with our presenter. But thank you guys for kind of starting to think about this topic. I'm going to introduce our presenter now. Jesse Holcomb is a professor at Calvin College. He previously has worked for the Pew Research Center and Gallup, doing a lot of research into local media and its relationship with democracy. And he's really going to be talking to us tonight about why local media matters, what its relationship to democracy is, and how we can really save local media. So join me in welcoming Jesse Holcomb.
Thank you, Jane. Thank you. This is actually my first time on campus. So I'm having fun getting lost and getting parking tickets and all that kind of stuff. So thanks for having me here. Thank you, Jane. Thank you, Melissa. As Jane mentioned, before joining the faculty over at Calvin in Grand Rapids, I've basically spent, after getting my start in journalism in my career, I've spent the last, I guess, dozen years or so studying public opinion and doing a lot of survey research at the Pew Research Center, and I still do some work for Gallup. Sort of in my role as faculty, I consult with them and help them with a lot of their survey research about the relationship between media and democracy. So one thing I want to say before I dive in is that I am more than happy to talk not just about local media and democracy, but also national media. A lot of my work has covered topics like CNN and Fox News and what we call polarization, this tendency for our society to kind of split apart because of our political views and the role that the media plays in that. So I'm happy to take this in a variety of different directions. And it was really nice to get that little opening exercise so I can kind of see what's on your mind. I heard the word bias come up a few times, so we can talk about that. But I'm going to talk with you about actually some of what's been on my mind lately and about some of the research that I've been doing with Gallup. And this is actually some research that's actually going to be teeing up some stuff that's going to be coming out publicly over the next month or two. So be looking for that. Polling. This is Democracy 101, and I think of polling and survey work as kind of part of the work of democracy in many ways. In public opinion polling, we ask, in this case, the American people, but we do survey work around the world too. We ask them what they think and what they do. And we collect those data and we report them out and publicize them. And in doing so, we think of public opinion research as kind of a feedback loop that presents the views of the American people and lets decision makers, elected officials, journalists, and other powerful people kind of get a glimpse into what all of us are thinking at any given moment. So in that sense, I like to think of public opinion research as kind of a vehicle for democracy that helps the people talk back in a kind of organized way. It's not perfect, it's got its limitations, but it's one way that the people can speak. So some of what I'm going to be sharing with you is based on survey and public opinion research about how the American people think about media, what they do with the media, right? And sort of what their aspirations are, maybe what some of their worries are. I just want to reinforce that we can take this conversation in a variety of different directions. So I start off with this question: does democracy need the news? We kind of covered this a little bit. I got a sense that some of you think about local media, so weather and school closings. I know some of you pay attention to the local media when it disses your school or something that you care about. If it portrays you or maybe people like you in a negative way, we kind of perk up. But raise your hand if you, and this is the no judgment zone. Do you consume local news, like local newspaper, local TV, Wood TV8? Okay, a few of you do, some of you do. That looks about right, okay, based on what I would have expected. When I think about local news, I think about you know, stuff like this. You know, there's like a lot of, you know, big questions still about big things. There's a lot of kind of mundane stuff that will show up in your local newscast. I recognize that in local media. Stories about stuff that maybe doesn't seem all that important. You know, like there was this review of the local Olive Garden that got a lot of press. It was a South Dakota story. So I get it if this is sort of your idea of local news, because this is a lot of local news is kind of like this, and it's okay to kind of think like what is this really for? Like what, you know? But here's the thing. There are a lot of people out there, a lot of well, journalists is really are the loudest in the room that are very adamant that local news is really connected to democracy. It's really important, that it matters for society. And I want us to take a moment to think about, like, do we buy that? If what we imagine in our minds come across that screen in the local paper, the weekly paper that you see in the grocery store maybe, how does that sort of comport with what some of these other people out there are saying, that local news is really important, it matters, it's the fourth estate, it's critical that we have this First Amendment protection for journalists, and they're under assault, and if we didn't have them, things would be terrible. So I want to help us kind of bridge that divide between a certain kind of perception and a reality, and try to help us figure out a little bit, really, where does the media find itself? What role does it play? And I use a little bit of research to help us answer that question. It's not the only way, but it's one kind of powerful way. Okay? One way to kind of answer this question of what does local news, or really the news in general, matter to democracy, is by asking the American people what they think. Because that's part of it. Okay? And so I'll start off by saying that most people, most Americans, think that the news matters. And if you look, that's a lot of columns, but if you look at the far left column here, you'll see that essentially about 84% or so of the American people think that the news is either very important or it's critical to democracy. Okay? That's the news media in general, right? That it is somehow critical. So it's this kind of like, okay, in general, in the abstract, the news is important for democracy. But I do think the devil is in the details, and when you ask the American public a few other kind of specific questions about really, okay, what about how they deal with the facts? What about things like bias? The answer is a little bit murkier. They don't get an A+. First of all, this is when we ask people, do you trust the news media? Okay, a common question that Gallup has been asking in their polls for probably about 40, 50 years, really. And we learned that trust in the news media peaked back around the Nixon Watergate scandal. Okay, that was when we had a solid majority of Americans who trusted the news media to do a good job. Ever since then, trust has been on a downward decline. Yeah, it'll spike now and again, but really we reached a low in 2016, right, where we only had 32%. That's about one in every 3 people. So that would be like out of your table, only like 1 or 2, or in a packed table, you have like 3 of you who would say, yeah, I trust the media. The rest of you are like, no, it's biased, it's sloppy, it gets the facts wrong, it doesn't represent me well, a whole host of things. So it was not doing very well in the eyes of the public. you can see that it's kind of spiked back up a little bit in the past couple of years. Now, there's a reason for that, and it doesn't mean that everyone is starting to trust the media more, just that some of us are. Okay? Trust is still kind of low. Now, and that was Gallup research. This is some Pew research. Most people typically approach a news article expecting that it will be generally accurate. Okay? They have a general expectation of accuracy, but also most people have this lingering suspicion that when a journalist or a news organization makes a mistake, they're going to try to cover it up. Okay? Again, it gets at that kind of lingering sense of distrust. How about this? If I were to ask you, do you think the media do a good job or a bad job holding powerful people accountable? So that would be something like if the president or someone in the White House maybe might be doing some wrongdoing, right? Might be acting in some kind of corrupt manner. Do you think that the news media do a good job of shining a light on that and investigating that? This is a question, again, that we've asked the American people for decades. And for a long time, there was some general sense of unified response. Most people thought, yeah, they do a good job in what we call that kind of watchdog role. They hold leaders accountable. And you'd find this to be the case whether it was Republican Americans or Democratic Americans or people in the middle. They would all say, yeah, the media do a pretty good job of holding our leaders accountable. That has changed, okay, and changed in a pretty dramatic way over the past couple of years, really shifting right around the time of the 2016 election of Donald Trump. At that point, we had the biggest split in the country on this question than we have ever seen before. We had 82% of Democrats saying, okay, the news media do a great job of this, so a vast majority of Democrats, and then only 38% of Republicans who thought that the media were doing a pretty good job, okay? Country is split in two, right, with one portion feeling pretty pleased with the news media's job, and the other half just down there with deeply seated distrust. Okay? When you see trust go up in 2018, that's almost all attributable to Democrats, right, who are more trusting. Republican trust is way down low. Okay? A lot of mixed reviews, okay? And I didn't even get into some of the data that we have that many people think that the media are biased. They do think that. Get the facts wrong a lot of the time, okay? But despite these mixed reviews on the part of the American people, we do have some evidence that journalism actually does something good for democracy, for our civic life together, right? And I'm just going to highlight a couple of reasons that I think that. Okay. Number one, we've learned that when newspapers close in a community, that is when they just shut down, civic engagement also declines in those communities, right? And this was studied in Colorado. Rocky Mountain News was a daily newspaper that existed for a long time. It closed back around, I think it was 2008, 2009. A researcher studied levels of civic engagement before its closure and after it, and found meaningful, statistically significant differences in levels of civic engagement, not just there in that community, but in other communities where a major daily newspaper had closed as well. We also know from research that reading a newspaper can mobilize up to 13% of non-voters, okay? So, in other words, the news can be this catalyst that can help get people off the sidelines and get them feeling empowered to make a choice at the ballot box. People who otherwise wouldn't vote are more likely to vote, at least some of them are, if you get a newspaper in their hands or on their phone, right? We also know, all right, voters in districts with less campaign coverage have a harder time evaluating candidates, all right? You think about it, candidates in local elections especially, down ballot candidates, I mean, it's hard to find the time to really learn about all of these candidates for dog catcher, right? For municipal courts, for city clerk and county officials, right? It takes a lot of fact gathering and a lot of initiative, really, to try to collect that information, okay? Local news covers those elections and provides at least some information about those candidates, what they stand for, what their record is, and we find that when that goes away, voters get a headache, okay? They have a harder time really sifting through the information, and that in turn may lead to less voter participation, okay? We're seeing more and more research that makes these direct links between the importance of news and, frankly, especially local news, and democracy and civic engagement. And research that makes a direct causal link, all right? This is a cause and effect kind of relationship, right? And I want to say that if journalism strengthens democracy, and we're seeing more and more evidence that it does, then we need to pay attention to what's going on with journalism. Journalism as a business, as an industry, is in a state of pretty intense disruption, has been for the last decade especially, okay? We have entered, as a society, into a high-choice environment for the public, okay? And this chart, again, this is some Pew Research data that shows adoption of different technological devices over the years. And you see the rapid and substantial increase in the percentage of Americans who own a cell phone, all right? Basically, almost everyone. Who have internet access, almost everyone, okay? The very quick and steep increase in the amount of people who have a smartphone, okay? Which has revolutionized the way that we consume information. Tablet ownership, is about half. How many of you have a tablet, like an iPad or, okay. A few of you do. Somebody once thought that was going to sort of revolutionize the news, and I don't think, I think that was a little maybe overstated. But how many of you have a mobile device of another kind, right? A smartphone or a cell phone, right? A lot of you do. And for those who don't, we also learn in the research that they use devices owned by others in their immediate social networks, okay? Increasingly, many people are only tethered to their mobile device, and they use it for all kinds of things. Job search, transportation, okay? With this high-choice environment, news now has more competition for our attention than it used to, okay? And this really started with broadcasting and then cable TV, right? We didn't really have cable news, Fox, CNN, MSNBC, until the mid-90s, okay? And that came as an outgrowth out of the talk radio sort of phenomenon and broadcasting in general, okay? Then we had the consumer internet, and everything changed, all right? Think about how you use your time, which is a very precious resource. You have so many different devices and content competing for your attention. News has a lot more to compete with now than it used to, all right? And so we see circulation, that is the number of newspapers that are purchased and delivered, has declined pretty substantially. It doesn't mean that people are necessarily reading a lot less newspaper content because you read it on your phone sometimes, but it's a different kind of experience. You might come across a headline, you swipe around, you go past it. There's a lot less room for deep engagement. All right. high choice environment for our attention. There's another high choice environment, and this is for advertisers. Okay? Suddenly, if you're a company with a product to market, you don't have to go through a newspaper to reach customers. Okay? I know it sounds basic, but this was sort of the primary way for many years in which marketers would reach audiences. Okay? Think about classified ads or those big bundles of ads that like fall out of a newspaper, if you've ever sort of encountered that. And then, of course, advertisement on television, right, came along. But now, marketers can go directly to consumers on the internet. There's unlimited real estate, if you will, on the internet. Social media, Facebook, Google, they can target their customers in scary ways, in very effective ways. They don't need newspapers. All right? And as a result, the news has to compete now for revenue. So their business model has kind of been upended, right? When we published this chart, someone sort of made a stegosaurus outline of it because, you know, the news business in some ways feels like a dinosaur, okay? Revenue has declined dramatically over the past 20 years because, frankly, marketers and businesses don't need the newspaper to get their message out to consumers, and so revenue declines. And what happens when money's not coming in anymore to local newspapers? Right? Yeah, other stuff happens, right? Other stuff declines, okay? When a news industry loses its monopoly on attention and on revenue, especially among younger people, right? We know this, okay? 5% consuming a print newspaper. When that happens, we start to see a domino effect, okay? Because when you're covering a campaign and you're finding information as a journalist about local candidates, when you're trying to do the hard work of exposing wrongdoing of elected officials, right, that takes a lot of time, it takes a lot of expertise, and it takes a lot of energy if you're a local journalist or a national journalist, right? Those people got to get paid. It is expensive work to do this kind of high-impact investigative journalism, okay? So if the news business is in a state of disruption, we start to see fewer journalists in communities, right? Journalists get laid off, right? We start to see newspapers close, and that's what we call news deserts, right? A new phenomenon emerging where you've got big pockets of American life where there's no news, right? No one is providing that on-the-ground coverage of day-to-day life. Okay? And I do want to say, I'm not going to be that sort of Pollyanna kind of person about the news industry. In fact, I was hearing from some of you, right, some real legit grievances about representation in news, okay, and about bias. News media haven't done themselves any favors, really, in really earning that trust. Okay, remember this stuff, right? I mean, I don't know how well that really builds credibility. You ever see these things? Okay? They call them chum boxes, right? It's that sort of jumble of garbage advertising that is on almost every news website that you go to, right? Most of it is just completely adrift of reality. It's clickbait. Some of it's false, sensational, and super weird, okay? But at the end of the day, if we didn't have journalism, okay, we wouldn't have this kind of accountability, right, in our society, right? We wouldn't have the ability of mortgage agencies and organizations to rectify wrongdoings when they screw people out of a fair mortgage, right? You've got some folks here at GVSU who've done some really good reporting in collaboration with USA Today to shine a light on unfair lending practices, okay? Who's going to do that? It's journalists who are going to do that, okay? When you've got victims of sexual assault and rape, right, who as a whole class of people are being silenced because of powerful people in Hollywood, in Washington or elsewhere, right, who are able to sort of wield that threatening kind of almost censorship, right, because of their power. It takes a journalist and a powerful, muscly news organization to be able to go there, get the story, get the facts, shine a light, and hopefully bring some justice to those issues, right? And we've seen some really powerful examples of that kind of accountability journalism, even in the past few years when the news business has been in a state of some disarray. So a few things that I think, what can we do about this problem? So the problem, as I see it, is a weakened local news ecosystem that is still very vital, but is weakened, okay? What can we do about the problem of a larger news ecosystem where you're on social media and you aren't really quite sure what's true and what's not because we've got some garbage mixed in with really good stuff? Okay, these are sort of twin related problems. Okay, so I just want to suggest a few provocations here, and I'd love to hear from you as well. But first, really, is this matter of media literacy, becoming a more educated news consumer. And there are a few ways to do it, right? You've got great faculty here and resources here at the university that can help you think through these things, right? But there are some basics, okay? Right? When a news outlet shows its work, when it's transparent, okay, about how it arrived at its conclusions in a news story, there's a good chance, right, that they're acting in good faith, okay? When you're reading news content and from a single outlet, and it always seems to confirm like your deep-seated suspicions, right, and kind of props you up and think, wow, they know exactly what I'm thinking, right? And they come to the same conclusion every time about some political issue. Think twice, okay? Think twice. The truth is messy. The real world is messy, right? And a solid news organization is going to reflect the messiness of the world, right? If you don't know, and it's really hard to figure out, like, who's the funding behind a news outlet, okay, or who's publishing it, right, that might be a red flag too. And there are all kinds of resources online to help us be more equipped to be media literate in a very sort of challenging information environment. I'd also give a pitch to get involved with the Lanthorn. Getting involved in student media is one of the and I say this as a student media advisor, incredible ways, right, to get a civic education, right, to learn how democracy works, right? When you're doing a story and there's someone who doesn't want that story told, you learn really quickly about the value of journalism, okay? And you've got a great paper here and you've got a great advisor, okay? Student media. And when you reach a point where you're able to, right, if you're employed, right, you have a job, I would encourage you to consider supporting quality journalism with your dollars, right? Maybe it's the local public radio station, right, that's doing really important stories about your community, and they rely on, your $10 to help them every year tell important stories. Think about doing that. And there's a great website called Newsmatch, right, which will help you find really high-quality local media in your state, in your area, and help you find a way to support that work. Finally, I'd say criticize the media when they fail, which is often, okay? But be prepared to speak up as well when journalists come under attack by powerful people. I think that a threat to a free press is a threat to all of us. And silence does that problem really no favors. And with that, I would love to take your questions and hear some of your feedback. Thank you. Anyone?
I absolutely agree with you that, and seems like with what most people think, that there is a bias that can be present in the news, and whenever we find ourselves consistently affirmed in our biases, that maybe we should question what's really going on in that news source. But I also wonder if often, or sometimes we might get upset and immediately blame the news as being biased if it's exposing some kind of truth that is inconvenient to us. And so we might write it off as being, oh, that's just biased, rather than, doing some rigorous examination of what's really going on there, and how we might be implicated in that. So I was wondering if you could speak to that.
Oh, are there? Okay. Good. Okay. What was the way you put it, being constantly affirmed in our biases? I liked. That was a very artful way of putting it. One of, I think a real poison pill was, frankly, when, and I'll just be frank and honest about this, was when Rupert Murdoch really sort of developed a concept for Fox News, right? There was a genuine need, I believe, for a news source that would speak to a part of America that felt like they were disenfranchised politically, right? But the way it was done with the creation of Fox News was that so much of the media content that appeared and continues to appear on the air in Fox News is about the media. Okay, so it's not just about politics. You hear a lot about politics on Fox and on CNN too. But it became a vehicle for, it became a portal for so many Fox News viewers to feel like the national media are sort of, no matter what, they are completely gone. They are entirely 100% super liberal. They never get anything right, and they are out to get you. And when you've got a core audience that hears that message over and over and over again, it kind of reinforces your business model. It says we're the only ones who are going to tell you the truth. But I think that it poisoned the atmosphere a little bit. And so this sort of crying foul over bias, it does become a bit of a knee-jerk reaction, I think. And I don't know about you, I've definitely read news articles or seen stories that that don't jibe with my view of the world, and it makes me uncomfortable. We've all had that experience, I think, where we see something that seems like maybe it's factual, maybe there's some truth to it, but it makes our head hurt, right? And so that's a heart thing at the end of the day too, right? Are you willing to sort of get outside that lane? And it is hard to do with our social platforms, right? I'm not saying that we live in a super filter bubble world. I don't actually believe that. But if we want to, we can. We can reinforce those ideas. So it's hard. And I think what we really need is some better conservative-oriented media that's not Fox News, right? That's based on real reporting. There's a lot of stories that need to be told that aren't being told, and I don't think Fox is the best way to do it. There's a market opportunity there, and there's a real gap, and we'll see who fills it.
So I've noticed that a lot of news places, they'll do a story and then it'll turn out that it's not correct. And then they'll go back and they'll just kind of change it, and they won't let anybody know that they've done so. Mm-hmm. Is that dishonest, or is that right or wrong, or what are your thoughts on that?
Is it on? Yes. So, right, who among us, right, has not, sort of screwed something up and then just not broadcast that to the world? I know I've been in that situation as a journalist, where I've screwed something up in an environment where it's high stakes. You know, journalists are trained professionally to value accuracy above all else. And I think they need to do a better job of kind of telling that story, because they are. In a newsroom environment, to get a fact wrong is just like the worst sin you could commit. And it's embarrassing. And there's a real culture, right? You see mistakes all the time, right? But what you don't see is the fact that this is this sort of miracle that happens all day long, every day, to bring the news in. And we call it the first draft of history for a reason, right? It's not the final story, but it's the best obtainable version of the truth at any given time. So there's bound to be mistakes. The best practices, if you will, is to correct as quickly as possible, and then to make a note to sort of any article that contains a correction should have a note either at the top or at the bottom of the article, depending on the severity, alerting the reader to the error that was made and the correction that was made instead. So what they got wrong, how they fixed it. And you'll sometimes see news organizations that will tweet or post about that on social media, say we updated or corrected our story. But that's really what should happen. It isn't always what happens. Someone has created a bot that shows, I think it's called New York Times News Diffs, which shows when text has been changed in an online article in the New York Times. And it isn't always to correct something that's flagrantly wrong, but text gets updated online all the time. News articles are not these static things of the past anymore. They're kind of living things. And when a news agency changes something, I think they have a responsibility to alert their readers. It's really important, as best they can. They don't always do a great job of that.
So I'm just wondering, I know you really stressed journalism, but should we, to become more well-rounded, is it important to look outside of journalism too, like other platforms like the radio and Yeah.
Oh, yeah, that's a great question. So I would just suggest that you can find really good journalism, not just in a paper and not just on a website, but in all other kinds of mediums too. You can find great documentary journalism, and I'd say that journalism exists in documentary films too, in many cases. On the radio, I listen to, you probably do, some fantastic podcasts. Some of them give me the news of the day in the morning, but others kind of tell a story. True stories, right? Immersive stories that give you a window into the world or a window into an individual's life and make you maybe empathize a little bit more, help you understand someone's position in society in ways that you wouldn't otherwise. So kind of like great works of fiction that can really be this sort of humanizing force. Great works of immersive narrative journalism, whether it's in broadcast or on the radio or in a podcast or in a magazine, can really have that same effect as well.
Come back to you.
I got really two questions. One, does your research show, like there's watching news and then reading articles? A lot of consumers, do they take some time to read the articles, or are they just skimming through? And most articles we get are very summary oriented, so encouraging people to actually go and read more extensively on that. And then secondly, I think you talked about national and local news, but I think in a global environment too, I think there's a lot of ability to read the global news because it does have an impact on national things. Like one of the things I love reading is The Economist. That's really good. I think it's, to me, by far that I've read the most balanced, and it talks a lot about world news and even at the national level.
Oh, thank you for raising those points. And to the latter question, I will say, based on my research, we've known this for a long time, and it's kind of a sad tale, but American news audiences, at least, tend to care a lot more about what happens in their own backyard than what happens over the next hill. So we see in our surveys that people pay a lot of attention to what's news around their local community. They'll pay a little less attention to national affairs, but less attention still to international affairs, right? It's kind of, it's a bit of an American disease, this lack of just interest in global affairs. Actually, one thing that we are starting to see, and I think will be a trend, is an interest in national affairs kind of sucking up all of the oxygen, both from local interest and global interest. What happens in Washington, in the Trump White House, has become this subject of intrigue for so many Americans that, and disgust, really. It's both, but obsession, that it causes us to, in some ways, lose our interest in other affairs, and I think that's a bad thing. In terms of reading and time spent, we do know from our research that you give someone a really long article, they'll spend a little bit more time on it than they will on a short article. But we don't tend to spend a lot of time reading this kind of content. We're grazers. We tend to sort of dip in and dip out. One of my favorite survey responses in a survey about how people use Facebook for news is that someone said in the survey, I don't really feel the need to go and search for the news. The news finds me, is what this person said. And I thought that was a really interesting way of describing what I think is a common kind of phenomenon. That if it comes across our phone in a news alert or in our news feed, we kind of look at it, we read the headline. Headlines matter a lot, okay? But we don't necessarily take a lot of time to go in depth. Again, it's that competition for our attention. There's a lot of it right now. A lot of you are students, right? You're super busy, okay? But we do also, the final thing I'll say is that we tend to, given a choice, we tend to prefer reading the news to watching it, especially online. We prefer to read, just generally speaking. You may differ, right? Prefer to read it.
So you talked about how the media needs to hold people accountable, hold people in power accountable. I've noticed that the CNN, all those guys, only criticize the president, and then Fox News only supports the president. So I'm just curious why they're so one-sided, because I've actually never seen Fox News criticize Trump, and I've never seen CNN say anything good about him. So I was just wondering why they don't say, oh, he's done some good things, but he's also done some bad things.
I think it's a great question. And I think your assessment is pretty accurate, and more so today than it ever was before. In fact, I've seen CNN change more than I've seen Fox change. And I guess I would say my answer, and I know people who work at Fox and at CNN, and there are some good people at both organizations, but it's a business, right? Cable news is a business. I don't necessarily feel like it's a business that is really all that good for our democracy right now, because it traffics in a kind of outrage theater, right? We all know this. That sensational, outrageous, emotionally driven content will drive up ratings, viewership. Viewership is good for advertising on TV, which is good for business, okay? And one thing that cable specializes in is what we call a niche audience. So Fox found its niche pretty early on. Thought there's a lot of conservative people here in this country who don't feel like the New York Times speaks to them, rightly or wrongly. And we are going to target those people with content that they're going to enjoy, and content that's going to, that's not going to that's going to sort of affirm their biases. And CNN used to be a little different. I think in our polarized age of post-Trump politics, it has found its own niche, right, in an adversarial kind of way, okay? And I'm not saying don't be adversarial to the White House. We need to be, right? But there's also a lot of material on CNN that adds more heat than light, I would argue, with some exceptions. Okay.
Getting my steps in here.
I just kind of have a question in regards to your research and how you will go about that, because it seems like a lot of times in quote-unquote research, a lot of the stuff you can do, you can sway it with terms of like who you're going after in your demographics to anything in regards to that. So how do you actually then come up with an unbiased way to do that, and like especially in your background?
Okay, so great question. The question is about the research process. Doesn't that get biased, right? And so let me sort of describe the process. The Pew Research Center takes their call to be nonpartisan very seriously, because they feel like if we're going to be a trusted source of research, then we have to be able to make the case that we're not kind of trying to bias our survey questions. Right? There's a book out there like How to Lie with Statistics or something, and if you take a stats course, a basic stats course, you're gonna learn that there are ways to manipulate your research design in a way to kind of achieve an outcome. Okay, so I wouldn't say that public opinion researchers like myself don't have our views, our political views. We do. But in a place like the research organization, those views are constantly put to the test, and in the form of what I would call like 3 or 4 hour-long drag-out research design sessions, where we bring all of our best ideas to the table, and those ideas kind of get torn apart by the rest of the group. Try to think about it from every possible angle. And frankly, it's also why organizations like Pew and news organizations as well just need to be more diverse, okay? Because you might have a mental and intellectual commitment to trying to not be biased, okay? But if everyone in the room looks the same way, if we're all white, if we're all highly educated, higher socioeconomic status, right? If we're all, politically liberal, then no matter what you try to do, you are only going to tackle problems from a certain kind of point of view, and you're going to miss really, really important ideas and questions. Right? So that's why diversity in newsrooms and in research institutions is really important. But the other element of it is, again, like I say with the news, show your work. Okay? Good research, you put it out there for the public to see. You don't hide your methods. You don't bury things. You make sure that anyone who reads your survey, the findings are going to be clear and easy to understand, and that you tell them how you made your design, and that they can evaluate it on those terms.
Especially with kind of the new presidential election that's coming up, and watching some of the debates already that are happening, how do you actually shift through all the articles and stuff in regards to those debates to find the truth, especially when one of the debates I saw like a couple people really go at it, and then you're like, wow, okay, that person seems to be a really, really bad person. When you start going through different articles and reading about the facts, you're like, well, maybe it wasn't as truthful as the other person was trying to make it seem. But then you read another article and it seems like she's even more of a worse candidate than what was even like she got shown on TV. So how do you actually shift through everything to actually find the truth?
Yeah. I get that question more than any other question, right? And you'd think, with the amount of times I'm asked that question, I'd have an easy answer for you, but I don't. Okay? Really, it's an embarrassment of riches in a way when it comes to national political media. Even while there's these struggles with local journalism at the local level, our national media in some ways have never been more robust. There are so many journalists who show up at these debates, who show up at the White House from all kinds of news outlets, from CNN and Fox, but also the New York Times, the Washington Post, Wall Street Journal, National Review, and on and on. And all of them come at the facts from a little bit of a different perspective, okay? Sure, I think that there are some outlets that do a better job of keeping close to the facts than others. I think the Associated Press is a pretty good place to start for an unvarnished account of just what happened. But AP journalists have their biases too, and they got their slant. I think that the New York Times is great coverage, but they also have been making a lot of mistakes lately. I think, you know, if you, I was doing this with my journalism students today, give them a set of facts, okay, that are undisputed. This was about a robbery. It's a little class exercise, and the job for these students was to arrange the facts in a certain order, okay? What do you emphasize? What goes at the top of the story? What goes in the second paragraph and down below? Okay, what do you include? What do you exclude, right? I think what we learn is that it's not enough even to just have the facts. It's the way those facts are arranged, okay? So all I can tell you, right, is to expose yourself to a range of news outlets, right, recognizing that Annie and everyone are going to have sort of their own version of things, but you want to stick with news outlets that are transparent about their reporting process, right? Individual journalists that you know, right, and this takes some work, right, because they're individual reporters who you know will do a good job. The New York Times sent Sabrina Tavernise, national reporter, out here to West Michigan to do a story about the changing political kind of makeup of this part of the country. She came out 3 separate times, in June, July, and August, right? She met with people in houses of worship. She went to colleges and universities. She went door to door with political candidates. She met people on the street, okay? She spent months of work fact-checking rigorously, and then she published an article. You can read it. It went up last week. And I'll tell you, people who I know who are been grown up here all their lives, they're experts in politics, okay? They read that article and they thought, you know what? She got it right, okay? People who I know who are conservative, people who I know who are liberal, they thought she did a pretty good job of telling the story of this place. But it took a heck of a lot of work, right? But I met Sabrina when she was out here, and I could tell just from spending an hour with her that she was one of these people who really cared about getting it right, okay? Person of character, okay? So, you know, and sometimes it just comes down to that. It comes down to character, it comes down to expertise, and a commitment to getting it right and correcting the record when you make a mistake.
Another one?
So you just mentioned that journalists who came out 3 times, but one of those factors, how much do journalists take in building relationships? Because she had to come and do that type of work. So.
Yeah, I mean, again, I talk about how expensive it is to do good journalism. That's an example. All those trips out here. Yeah, she had to build relationships because, you know, and she had to cultivate trust too, okay? Because if you think about it, if you're just an ordinary civilian, and again, this is an article about the sort of the changing political views of West Michigan. I don't know, I mean, I don't know about you, but I don't really want to talk, I'd be uncomfortable talking to a journalist on the record and have them using my name and quoting me in an article in the New York Times that's going to be, you know, a global news organization where I'm coming out to the world about what I think about politics. Okay, that's hard to do. And so how, if you're that person, how do you grow to trust the journalist to tell your story fairly, to treat you with honor and respect? That comes from relationship building. And it comes with a set of social skills that take a lot of work to kind of develop. But she did a great job with it. And it's kind of, you know, it's it's a sign and encouragement and a reminder that it can be done well, but it's a craft and it's a profession.
So this is another observation that maybe you could comment on. But Grand Rapids made me think of this. Grand Rapids was recently in national news coverage for having one of the hottest zip codes in the country. I think it's Riverside Park neighborhood. And so everybody was talking about it and saying, oh, look at us, we're hot, we're up and coming. And then when I was reading local news coverage of some of the conversations that we've been having around city policing, community policing, particularly of African American neighborhoods in Grand Rapids, I came across an article cited by a local news source that was 2 years old, that I cannot believe that it took me this long to come across it, that said that Grand Rapids ranks as the second worst place in the country for African Americans, families, to find success. And so I thought, how can these two narratives exist in the same place? And it really showed me why paying attention to local news was important, because I don't think I would have found that story otherwise. So I just wanted to share that.
Yeah. No, and it's absolutely true. And I will say the Grand Rapids local media situation is like, it's hurting a little bit. My father-in-law was a sports editor for the Grand Rapids Press, and he took a buyout. And they're really, for a city that's this sort of big and robust and growing economically, and for all like the powerful people, I mean the DeVosses, the Van Andels, the sort of people who control a lot of stuff, there's surprisingly little local journalism that's going to be sort of accountability journalism. But when it comes to that particular topic, I would say one outlet that did a pretty good job, that has done a good job covering it, is the local public radio station, WGVU, right? You all know it well. Dustin Dwyer is a great reporter who's done really important stories about exploring some of these issues of inequality and the irony of the fact that, yeah, Grand Rapids has some of the hottest zip codes, but it's also one of the most segregated cities in the country, and outcomes and quality of life for African Americans is shamefully low. It's a really important story that needs to be told, and who's going to tell it in a kind of public way but for journalists?
That's great. I actually have a question, Jesse, and I think that's a nice segue. So the fact that you're talking about Dustin Dwyer and his work, for example, I know one thing that he does really well is diving into the narratives and helping us to kind of see the world, both the context but also the experience of people within that context. So my question to you is kind of a big one, and that is, I guess, what do you think is at stake? So when I think about some of the data that you shared, the disparity in levels of trust, the disparity in the kind of level of importance of the news, looking around the room and seeing a room full of people who I'm sure are, taking full loads in classes, working, involved in, lots of things, have families. So the effort that it takes to do something like figure out who on the debate platform is telling the truth, it just takes a lot of work. So I'm thinking to myself, are there times in history, either in this country or in other countries, where we've seen the kind of polarization and the kind of, I think, disengagement that we're seeing in this country? And if so, what's at stake? And maybe there are folks who either remember those times or know of other parts of the world where, where the trust in our institutions has eroded in such a way, and that we've become so polarized that, like, what's at stake? So why should we care?
Well, I mean, we're seeing kind of this slow but unmistakable shift over the past few decades, what we call polarization, where people who all think a certain way kind of on the left, and people who think a certain way on the right tend to cluster and split apart. Those people also tend to be the loudest among us, I will say. So if you're really far left or you're really far right, you're also going to be sort of shouting the loudest. You're going to be the most active and engaged in politics, and you're going to be very vocal on social media. All right, and we see that trend growing and growing and growing. And it sort of is concurrent with the decline in trust. So, I mean, what that's resulting in for a lot of people is this feeling of, if you feel, we call it news avoidance, okay? It's a sort of a thing where you're frustrated by the news, you don't know what to trust, or you might just be burnt out by all of the rage and stuff that's happening in national politics. You kind of tune out. And that's a sort of, I mean, it's an urgent issue. And I don't know, frankly, exactly how we sort of find our way out of it. But I have a feeling that the answer is like in front of us, right? In our doorstep, where it might feel like at the national level, how do we solve these problems? We're so split apart, and there's too much news, and also, what can I do anyway about politics, right? Efficacy. Locally, though, I feel like our pathway to re-engagement and energy and good faith is in our local communities. You can make a difference, right? Local journalists who you can support, okay? Local policy issues where you actually can make a difference by showing up, voting. And people who are your neighbors, right? Who are not invisible people on social media, but like actually people in your community. You have to sort of face the fact that they're human too. So I turn to local community and to neighborhood as a sort of, it's not going to solve our problems, but it's one pathway towards sort of rebuilding something.
Okay. Any other questions? Comments? There's a lot to talk about. I mean, it's just amazing to me how much is embedded in all of what you've shared tonight. And, you know, when I think about what's at stake, I'm not a historian, I'm not a political scientist or a journalist, but I know that democracy is not a thing. It's not, you know, something that exists on its own, and it's not something that, you know, happens only in Washington, D.C. It's something that requires all of us to be paying attention and caring and doing the work. And, you know, I thought the question about global coverage was really interesting. The fact that we are so hyper-focused on what's going on in this country and really at the expense of looking around at the rest of the world and the impact that we are having in, you know, across the globe and vice versa. So there's a lot at stake, and I guess I would just encourage all of you, when you think about this idea of democracy, it really is, it's all of us together. It's, you know, it needs all of us to be active and paying attention and caring about each other and the world that we live in. So I would say there's a lot at stake. Yeah. All right. Are there any other questions for Jesse? We really appreciate your time tonight. No?
Well, this is really fun. Thank you for the pizza.
Yeah.
Thank you for coming out and then giving up your evening. And I'm of course happy to, if you have other questions, my email, you know, you should be able to find that, and I'm happy to follow up with you afterward and in the future.
Great.
So, thanks.
Let's give Jesse a hand. Thank you.
Thank you.
Make sure you do fill out your evaluations on your tables, grab some pizza for the road, and we also have got more Democracy 101 sessions coming up. We'd love to see you again. Thanks.